please.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. New Zealand First will support Part 6 as proposed by the Labour Party. It does preempt, in fact, parts of the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill, which is currently going through the process. But our support is with some caution, I'd have to say, because fixed boundaries have worked, in fact, in most parts of New Zealand quite effectively. Christchurch is one of those. But I accept that Christchurch, with its huge areas of land adjacent to it, is rather different than Auckland, which is built on an isthmus and has a much greater rate of growth. So bearing that in mind, I think it's quite appropriate at this stage that we do accept that some change is necessary in places such as Auckland to make the use of fixed boundaries no longer appropriate and to look for an alternative. And I think the alternative we have here is certainly one that we can consider supporting. And it's a shame, actually, that this proposal isn't going through a full select committee process, because this, like other provisions in the bill itself, really do need proper examination. So it's a shame that that's not happening. But we don't have the luxury of that. Here we are in urgency. Here we are having to look at Part 6. So on balance, New Zealand First will support Part 6, subject to the Greens amendments, which I think are satisfactory, and on the basis of the alternative to fixed boundaries, which are set out in new section 46C 2B in particular, but also D, E and F, C, D, E and F. And the crux is B, which actually says, and I quote, a requirement for local authorities to undertake detailed spatial planning which sets aside areas of special value and sets future infrastructure corridors and networks as an alternative to urban boundaries. And the other sections everyone can read for them, other paragraphs everyone can read for themselves. And the point, Mr Chairman, is this that I want to make, is that the the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill has drawn a large number of submissions in support of spatial planning. And it does seem to me, and to many people, that that is the way to go in the future, especially for Auckland. It is a much more sophisticated approach to planning, especially in high growth areas. And, but most of all, New Zealand First is very supportive of the parts of this particular section, and that's the new 46C2, all the parts of that, where it refers to infrastructure corridors and networks as a tool to prevent growth into inappropriate areas, especially those areas where delivery of infrastructure would be far too expensive, impracticable, or too remote from transport opportunities. And that's the point of Julianne Genta's amendments. So that's why we particularly support those. And I'd have to add this, Mr Chairman, in my 15 years on the Christchurch City Council, on more than one occasion, I actually tried to use the limitation of the expansion of infrastructure as a way to discourage inappropriate growth. But of course it was illegal to do so, so my attempts largely failed. And I'd have to say that some of the areas where that growth happened were areas which have now been red zoned, areas which should never have been developed on at all. And Megan Woods, nodding her head, is quite right. We all know what those areas were, and we all know that that development should have happened. So if we'd had this regime at that time, it would have been possible to avoid it. Now, finally, Mr Chairman, Julianne Genta was quite right when she referred to the need for development to take adequate notice of transport issues. And in fact, New Zealand First policy is to favour transport-led development. And you can see that in many parts of the world, so it's not a wheel that we have to reinvent. There should at least be adequate notice taken of transport issues when developments are approved. That's not happening currently. So with those qualifications, Mr Chairman, New Zealand First will be happy to support Part 6.
Mr Chairman,
Dr Megan Woods.